I'm Lauren Sega, Manager of Communications for Homeport, a nonprofit affordable housing developer in Central Ohio. We're in one of the fastest growing areas in the country, and while we've seen the growth, we've felt the pains that come along with it, especially when it comes to housing all of us and our incoming neighbors. Each month, we're interviewing local experts on the issues, the barriers, and the solutions around housing and development, hoping to shed some light on how we got where we are and what we can do to create a future that houses everyone. This is Level With Us. For today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Lark Mallory, former president and CEO of Affordable Housing Trust for Columbus and Franklin County, and founder of the new Mallory Economic Development Advisors, LLC. Lark is the honoree for our 10th annual Voice and Vision celebration. And if you're not familiar with that, that's basically our annual thank you everybody for helping us do everything we do event. And that takes place on October 16th at COSI this year. So the theme for our event this year is Building for an Equitable Future. And we knew there was no one who exemplifies that idea better than Lark Mallory. And you'll find out why after this episode. You can visit homeportohio.org to learn more about Voice and Vision, to register, or even become a sponsor if that tickles you. I'll also include a link to the event in the show notes. So Affordable Housing Trust, if you're unfamiliar, also goes by AHT. It's a CDFI, or Community Development Financial Institution. It's a nonprofit lender. They work with private and nonprofit and public sectors to develop affordable housing. They also have worked with Homeport in the past. Lark served at AHT for about 8 years, 3 in her capacity as president and CEO. During her time at the helm, she took AHT's work regional and brought an equity lens that spurred more investment in developments by minority builders than the organization had really seen before her. A tax attorney and accountant at her core, Lark knows the ins and outs of the work she leads, but has the incredible ability to see the bigger picture and understand how all the little details fit in. In this episode, we take a look at her accomplishments at AHT, hear her insight on Central Ohio's growth, and talk about the steps we need to take to build for a more equitable future. Let's lay the foundation.
AHT was founded in 2001 until 2023. AHT had only operated in Franklin County. So in 23, I presented the idea of taking us regional. We know that housing is a regional issue. We cannot put every single person in Franklin County. So as a region, we need to come together to address it. So I took us regional in 2023. In addition to that, I also closed our second investment fund in 23, which was a regional investment fund. Also started a couple of different programs, the Emerging Developers Accelerator Program and the AHT Housing Innovation Grant Program. For our 20 years of our existence, only operated in Franklin County. Mm-hmm. We know that the Mayor Ginther has been looking at housing as a regional issue, as well as our regional partners like MORPC. So I presented to our investors, some key stakeholders in the board, and started to socialize the idea of a much bigger footprint.
Yeah.
And so that's just about where AHT could deploy those dollars and how those dollars got deployed. But then also looked at some other things to support housing. So the AHT Housing Innovation Grant Program is a non-production grant program. Split into 2 different types of grants. One grant just supports homeowner repairs. Okay. What we know is that there are people who are living in areas that have traditionally gone without investment, and they need help. They've been there, they've weathered the storm. Now those areas are starting to improve. We need to keep them in their homes. So supporting nonprofits with homeowner repair programs, but then also supporting nonprofits that do housing but maybe need a one-time grant for something. Maybe that's a fence, or it could be,
like a playground, or
a playground, something to support the housing but doesn't necessarily produce another unit of housing. So started that program in 2022, and then also started the Emerging Developers Accelerator Program in 2022. So that program is designed to diversify and increase the number of suppliers of housing. We know how many housing units we need. We know the demand for housing. But with any complicated economic issue, it's not only the demand, you also have to look at supply. So the EDAP, acronym, Emerging Developers Accelerator Program, was designed to increase the number of suppliers. We also know that Mayor Ginther has said that that Columbus will be America's equal opportunity city. Franklin County commissioners have declared racism as a public health crisis and have recognized the racial wealth gap. So the EDAP not only increased the number of developers, the number of suppliers, but also diversified and was able to really address both the mayor's, what the mayor identified and what the commissioners identified. Yeah. So really designed to address a lot of issues at one time.
Yeah. Giving the opportunity for Black and other people of color to invest in the city that is theirs.
Yes. So people of color and women.
Yeah.
The real estate development, if you look around, does not have a lot of people of color. It does not have a lot of women. So really bringing both groups of people along, and then creating units. We need housing units.
Was it tough to get buy-in to the EDAP?
I think it was work. So I started researching the idea for the EDAP as general counsel. I was still the general counsel, and had heard about what other communities were doing. Started researching, looked at, talked to different people all around the country, and came up with a kind of a concept paper, and then presented that concept paper to the board of directors of AHT City and County.
Okay.
It took work. I don't know if hard is the right word, but it did take work.
But people were interested in doing it.
They were interested in doing it. And, my hope is that even though I'm no longer at AHT, there's still buy-in for the program. We did increase lending to people of color and women. The EDAP was part of that. But then also part of it was just letting people know that AHT existed and was interested in partnering on the finance side. AHT, for all intents and purposes, is a nonprofit, mission-driven, non-depository bank. It makes loans to developers of affordable housing. So part of increasing the lending to people of color and women was just to let them know that AHT existed. A lot of people just didn't know.
Yeah.
But being very intentional about talking to the community about what's available.
I really admired too how you were able to get so many stakeholders, regional stakeholders at the table and with their money, to bring their money. That's so hard.
So in 2019, AHT, City of Columbus, Franklin County, Huntington Bank, and it's important to identify Huntington Bank, announced the Housing Action Fund. That fund closed in January of 2020, so ironically right before the pandemic, right before George Floyd. It was a $100 million fund that Huntington led the way with $40 million. Steve Steinauer really did a lot of work and made a lot of phone calls to really drive the investment in that fund, and got to tip my hat to him and his team for really driving that, even helping us structure something that made sense that would make investors feel comfortable. And then they led the way with $40 million. So 40 million of the 100. When I took the helm of AHT, that fund was less than 30% deployed. When I left AHT, it was 100% deployed. So deployed means cash out the door, loans closed, or firm commitments that AHT could not back out of. And I share all of that to say that success breeds success. When it was time to raise the regional fund, there was already the example of the Housing Action Fund. And I could say that, okay, came in, this is where deployment was when I got here, this is where deployment is now, we need more money. These were the number of units that were created by the initial fund. This is how much more we could do, and we could do it regionally. That first fund could only be deployed in Franklin County. The Regional Impact Fund, regional, it could be deployed regionally. So, success begets success, and it's actually, and David Trotman, chairman of Park National Bank was the first commitment for the regional fund. Mm-hmm. And David Trotman, just reminded me that when you're doing good things, it almost attracts additional, resources to you. So, presented that idea, socialized that idea. As I mentioned, Park National was the first commitment to it. But then, so I am an attorney, right? And an accountant, and so I love complexity. But one of the things that I think really drove it home is structuring it as a fund of funds. So let's say you're out there in Delaware County and you want your dollars restricted specifically to Delaware County. You could invest in the overall regional fund, but identify Delaware County as your specific market. Couldn't go smaller than a county, but that gave people the ability to use the existing infrastructure and still target a different county. Now,
community, yeah.
Yes. And so I think it was the success of the existing fund, recognizing that housing is a regional issue, and then coming up with the specifics to address needs. Now, what was different about the second fund is I actually had to make all those calls myself. I think I had a handful of calls just saying, hey, this is what Lark and AHT are doing, she'll call you. But I really had to get out there and pound the pavement myself for this one, and brought in some new investors, people who had never invested with AHT. For example, Key Bank.
What was your appeal?
I think they knew success and a passion. I believe in housing, and just technical capability.
Yeah.
If you're going to run a fund, why not have a CPA with a law degree and a master's degree in tax law?
Yeah.
Kind of directing it. So I'm super proud of what I did there. Work is not done.
Yeah.
There's still, as you know, a lot of work to be done around housing, around equity, around economic development in our community.
And now it's time to level up. It seems like we have more interest and more investment in housing than we've seen before, and yet we keep falling up short with our number of units every year.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight to that?
I think you're right. One of the things that makes me bullish on housing is the fact that we do have more eyes looking at it. Mm-hmm. When AHACO first issued their report, we knew we needed 54,000 units, right? But those of us in the housing space knew we needed 54,000 units. The folks in the greater community really weren't talking about it. Now everyone is talking about it, and I think that's good. Mm-hmm. I think identifying the problem is the first step in addressing the problem. I'm excited to have folks focused on housing. What the city of Columbus is doing with its zoning efforts, I think is commendable and will really help us push housing, to where we need it to be. But again, the city of Columbus can't do it by itself. We need every community in our region to really look at what they are doing for housing and how they can improve that. Now, are we going to get the same kind of density downtown Columbus that we'll get in Newark? I don't think so, but we can have smart density where it makes sense. And what do I mean by that? I mean where there's already infrastructure. So if we already have roads, if we already have sewer, we already have water, let's create density where it already exists. I also think that could help us save some of our green space. Mm-hmm. If we keep doing housing how we've been doing housing, all we're going to do is just plow over the green space that we have. If we want to save some of it, we're going to have to go denser. We're going to have to go higher.
Build up, not out.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
It just feels like we're late to the to the get,
We're late, but we still have a chance. Yeah. We're not Austin late or San Francisco late. We can learn from what they did well and what they didn't do so well for us to do better. I think the zoning is going to be huge.
Yeah.
Austin did a lot with its zoning. I'm super excited to see what Columbus's zoning changes will do for us. We've briefly mentioned transportation. Mm-hmm. If you look at what Cleveland has done and what Charlotte did, just the BRT is going to make, such a big difference. There are some communities where, going back to the equitable side of development, where the governmental organizations and private organizations are very intentional with mm-hmm. equity. And you look at what Detroit, Chicago, DC have done around equitable development, or even Philadelphia. And those were some of the areas when I was researching for the EDAP I also talked to. There are lots of communities that are doing it well.
Yeah.
And we get to pick the best parts of what other people are doing and build our vision. So, and I also like what Atlanta did with housing.
I'm not familiar.
It's escaping me right now, but they had an entire housing strategy proposal, and some of the recommendations were easy. Mm-hmm. So, for example, and I think this is a really good one, there was a recommendation that municipalities take inventory of their own owned land and then prioritize housing. Mm. So where we don't know what John Smith wants to do with his land if he sells it, if it's municipal owned land, then you have much more flexibility in what you can do, but then also prioritize housing. But not just the city of Columbus, but every municipality can do that.
Yeah.
Prioritize housing. Let's have dedicated income streams to further housing. I do like, speaking of prioritizing housing, City of Reynoldsburg just did a project, or just approved a project with CMHA on its own land. So you don't have to fight with the seller if it's yours.
Right.
Now you still have to deal with zoning and permitting and all of those things, but if it's municipal owned land, then I think we can move further. I'd like to see all the municipalities take an inventory, prioritize housing, and prioritize specific dollars for housing. We saw that the city of Columbus approved $50 million bond package, and then came right back and approved $200 million. Obviously, every municipality does not have the same budget as the city of Columbus, but what can your municipality do?
Yeah.
Every super proud of Homeport and what you guys are doing with LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits. We know that every municipality may not have a LIHTC project in its municipality, but within your borders you can do something.
Housing is certainly a priority for Columbus, though some of our suburban neighbors are slow to join that conversation. we have a total of about $250 million in bonds approved for affordable housing development and preservation, plus the new zoning code.
We need all types of housing across our region at all price points. Now we know we need more LIHTC than we maybe need high-end luxury, but we need it all.
Yeah.
So each municipality can pitch in and do something, then we really can tackle this issue.
We've talked about this a lot, about how it seems it's just really hard to get housing for people who are making, minimum wage.
Yeah, that's the LIHTC.
Yeah. And not just a percentage of units dedicated to people making between 30 and 60, but like a lot of units. There just aren't enough LIHTC dollars to go around.
Whew, so let's take a step back. We know that if we are pushing down, right? So if you're at 120% AMI, which would be considered workforce in quotes because people like to use fancy terms for anything the same, other than just saying what you can afford at 120% AMI. But if you can't find 120% AMI, you're not going to get 200% AMI. You're going to go get something that's 100% or 80% AMI. You're going to push down on those units at lower AMI levels. So that's one of the reasons why I say we need it all. Otherwise, we're pushing down. Mm-hmm. And then with respect to our lower income citizens, you're right, we do need more LIHTC dollars. We need more LIHTC allocated to Central Ohio so that we can build. Yeah. Central Ohio, fastest growing region, obviously in the state of Ohio, in the Midwest, and now according to some stats in the entire country. To address that growth, we do need more LIHTC dollars allocated to Central Ohio, and maybe need to look at that, how they're allocating at the state level. Advocacy is required at a lot of different levels, and not just the state house, but also looking at the QAP that OFA uses to allocate 9% credits. What can be done there.
So if you're like me and a little new or behind on the language of housing industry ease, a QAP is the Qualified Allocation Plan, which essentially sets out the state's eligibility priorities and criteria for awarding low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, to housing developers. OFA, which is the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, I know, so many acronyms, uses that QAP to allocate their tax credits every year. And there's two kinds of credits, the more competitive 9% and the less competitive 4%. These credits offset the cost of a project. So a developer who gets the 9% has to come up with less gap funding than they would if they only received the 4%.
I am happy to see that the state now has its own LIHTC, but we do need to figure out how to get more dollars into housing for lower income individuals. The reality of it is no developer is going to do a deal that doesn't pencil out. If I were out there doing projects, I won't do a project that doesn't pencil out and makes me lose money. Yeah. LIHTC allows, and low interest rate loans, grants, whatever, allow those developers to do projects where lower income individuals can afford them without losing money. Right. Going back to the pandemic, we called people working in grocery stores heroes.
Essential.
Yes, essential. They're essential. Well, if they are essential workers, should we have housing for those essential workers? We need housing for teachers. Teachers, maybe at 60-70% AMI, that's LIHTC. Yeah. That's not even what we like to call workforce.
Yeah. And at that point, is it a housing issue or is it a wage issue?
Yes. It's, I think it's a combination of both. But we definitely need more dollars. So whether it's talking about those two investment funds that we talked about earlier, or the city's bond dollars, Franklin County has its Capital Magnet Fund program. But we need all of that coming to the table to drive down rents.
Yeah, and that's public funding. I know that we talked about Huntington throwing $40 million into a pot. How common is that?
Around the country, the two funds at AHT are not an anomaly. Around the country, these funds do exist.
Yeah.
So you also had OCFC, which is the CDFI affiliated with Ohio CAP, but they raised two funds as well. They raised one, Southside Renaissance Fund, that was just dedicated to the area around Children's Hospital, and then they just came back and raised their Linden Fund, which is Linden. So it's not an anomaly. 40 million in a fund, I think that was surprising, and again, kudos to Huntington.
Right.
But the second fund, PNC doubled its commitment. So it's not an anomaly, but they were new of that size here in Central Ohio.
Yeah. How do we get more of it?
Pound the pavement.
Yeah.
You just have to get out there and do it. And first, show that the funds that exist are already deployed. Demonstrate the impact of those funds on unit count, rents where we are, and like you just said, we need more housing for retail workers.
Yeah.
I'm a shopper. I love Easton, Polaris. Where do they live?
Right.
We need, if I want to go have a cup of coffee, where does the barista live?
Yeah.
But demonstrating impact on both unit count and individual lives, but you also have to demonstrate success, that you aren't messing up what's already been done. We are facing a crisis. We need to do something now so that it isn't a lost cause.
Yeah. Are we on the trajectory?
I'm optimistic, so I'm going to say
Yeah. We're not going to be in Austin. We're not going to be reporting.
No, we are at the table solving the issue now. We will not be an area where my barista cannot afford to live. But this also goes back to transportation.
Right.
And we've got to solve for housing so that we don't create more of a transportation issue. What happened in San Francisco is now if you work in the city, you live, an hour or two outside of the city? What does that do? Create a transportation issue. So we have to solve with keeping everything in mind. Mm-hmm. Understanding the chessboard, even if we're only looking at one piece, we still need to understand the chessboard. Both of my children played basketball until my daughter decided to become an equestrian and stop playing basketball, but she didn't grow taller. But both of them were guards, and I used to tell them, you've got to see the court. You have to see the whole court to be an effective guard. And so now we have to see the entire court, and we can't solve for issues in silos because they're so interrelated.
So that's it for our episode today, but I'd like to say hello out there to all the listeners. Just wanted to talk to you personally and say thanks for listening to Level With Us. Homeport is a nonprofit affordable housing developer. So what we're doing with this podcast is actually very new territory. I myself am an avid listener of podcasts, so it's been great for me to venture into it. And I'd love to hear from you. Who are you? What makes you listen? What do you want to hear about? I put these episodes out and they kind of just float out into the ether. And I just want some feedback, I guess. So wherever you listen, maybe do me a solid. Rate Level With Us. Maybe leave a little review. If it's nice, I'll read it out loud on the next episode and give you a little shout out. If it's mean, I might cry, which could also be fun, depending on what you're into. Okay, here's till next time. Level With Us is brought to you by Homeport and is recorded, mixed, and edited by Lauren Sega. All sources are in the show notes. Homeport creates strong communities by developing quality, affordable homes on a cornerstone of dignity, security, and opportunity. To learn more, or if you'd like to support our mission, visit us at homeportohio.org.